Hello, my name is Matt Shar, and this is the first in a series of short videos in which I will explain a few of the most common arguments against the existence of God, which are based upon perceived logical contradictions in his omni-attributes, namely his omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. We will begin with the so-called Omnipotence Paradox, which is a question designed to reveal a supposed logical contradiction in the concept of omnipotence. The Omnipotence Paradox is commonly stated by asking the following question.
Is God able to create a rock so heavy that he could not lift it?
The skeptic believes that this question will put you into a logical dilemma that you cannot resolve without admitting that God is not all-powerful. According to the skeptic, if the answer is no, then God's power is limited because there is something he cannot do. Namely, he lacks the ability to create a rock that is so heavy he cannot lift it. If the answer is yes, then God's power is limited because he lacks sufficient power to lift the rock. Unfortunately for the skeptic, this argument contains two major logical fallacies. The first is called the persuasive definition fallacy.
A persuasive definition fallacy occurs when a person uses a non-standard or incorrect definition of a term to make their argument seem as though it is logically valid.
In this instance, the skeptic is defining omnipotence as the ability to do anything, including the logically impossible. However, there is no reason to accept this definition, because omnipotence, or being all-powerful, only means that you can do anything that can be done by an exercise of sufficient power. Simply put, if you are omnipotent, then you can do anything that power can do. Power is the ability to deliver energy to some kind of an object or system, and is a measurement of the amount of work that can be performed over a period of time. Power can be used to move weight, light your house, make your car run, and many other things. However, no amount of power can make a square circle or a married bachelor, because these are logical issues, and no amount of power could grant one the ability to bring about logically contradictory states of affairs. The idea of an object that is so heavy it cannot be lifted by a being who is capable of lifting any amount of weight, no matter how heavy it is logically contradictory, just like a square circle. The idea of this hypothetical object is contradictory because an omnipotent being can lift an infinite amount of weight. So either the rock would have to be more than infinitely heavy, or the being would have to be both all-powerful but also limited in power at the same time. Using the correct definition of omnipotence, God not having the ability to bring about the existence of logically contradictory states of affairs is not in any way an infringement upon his omnipotence. He is not limited in his capacity to perform any action because it requires more power than he possesses, and that is all that is entailed in omnipotence.
It is important to keep in mind that this same line of reasoning applies to other things that God cannot do, not because his power is limited, but because they would entail logical contradictions. For example, God cannot lie, God cannot sin, and God cannot force a person to freely choose to do something.
The skeptic may refuse to accept the correct definition of omnipotence, and insist that it does entail the ability to bring about logical contradictions. If they do, the argument will be invalid because of the second fallacy. The second logical fallacy in this argument is that it is self-refuting. A self-refuting argument occurs when a person relies on premises which would falsify the conclusion of their argument if those premises are true. For example, if I was to argue that there are no true statements, that would be a self-refuting argument, because my argument that there are no true statements is itself a statement. So if my argument is true, my argument would be false. Hence, it is self-refuting. If we accept the skeptic's definition of omnipotence as including the ability to do that which is logically impossible, then God can create a rock that is so heavy he cannot lift it, then lift the rock. It doesn't matter that this is logically contradictory, because God is omnipotent, and the skeptic just insisted that omnipotence allows one to bring about logically contradictory states of affairs. Their argument is self-refuting because they are simultaneously arguing that logical contradictions are possible for an omnipotent being, and that an omnipotent being cannot lift the unliftable rock because that would entail a logical contradiction. At this point, the skeptic may argue that omnipotence is impossible because omnipotence entails the ability to bring about logical contradictions, but logical contradictions are not possible. In that case, we need to ask them the following question.
Do you believe there is an amount of power that could enable one to bring about a logical contradiction?
If it is true that an exercise of sufficient power can bring about a logical contradiction, then logical contradictions are not actually impossible, so the argument is invalid. If it is false, and no amount of power could bring about a logical contradiction, then omnipotence does not actually entail the ability to bring about a logical contradiction, so the argument is invalid. Whichever way the skeptic tries to use the omnipotence paradox, it is a terribly irrational argument and doesn't go 1 inch towards showing a logical inconsistency in the concept of God as an omnipotent being. In summary, we learned that the omnipotence paradox is a question that is designed to show that there is a logical contradiction in the concept of omnipotence, thereby demonstrating that an all-powerful God cannot exist. Then we learned that the person using this argument is either committing a persuasive definition fallacy or using a self-refuting argument. When the skeptic raises the so-called omnipotence paradox, first we need to clarify their opinion regarding the definition of omnipotence by asking them if they believe that there is an amount of power that could enable a person to bring about logically contradictory states of affairs. Then, whichever way they answer, we can help them to understand the error in their thinking. In closing, if your skeptical friend has been fooled by this argument, then they have accepted a completely nonsensical mishmash of words as evidence against the existence of God. Helping them to realize that they have been tricked into accepting an argument that is so obviously irrational can create a teachable moment in which we can help them to reflect on other ways they may have been deceived. However, we need to keep in mind that it does not feel good to realize that you have been fooled, so we need to do our best to avoid making the skeptic feel embarrassed by speaking with love, compassion, and humility. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.